Thank you everyone for joining us here. Some of you probably just jumped over from the mini session that we just did for Forms in a Flash. This one, we're talking about enabling external participants in PeopleSoft workflow. I'm Paul Taylor, President and CEO of Gideon Taylor, and a personal fan of extending GTE forms or extending workflow, extending PeopleSoft to include outside constituencies, to really allow your PeopleSoft processes to engage with anyone that you need to in order to optimize and extend a business process. So first, again, this is just a mini session, so we're going to move a little quickly, but you are welcome to jump in and ask questions either by coming off mute or putting something in the chat, and happy to respond in line. So prepare to be dazzled by my amazing graphical art capabilities here. So a brief history of business systems. In the beginning, there was the core system, and core users only were able to use it, and of course it was heavily authenticated or locked behind heavy doors. So if you go back to the 60s and 70s when we first started having business systems, it was just the people, just HR, just payroll, who were able to get in and use them, just AP. But then we added a layer, and we said, mostly in the 90s, we said, hey, let's build self-service applications. Let's let the employees all get in there, and instead of them having to print out or ask for printout of their paycheck, we'll just let them go in and look at it. Let them update their names themselves, maintain their own address information, their own W-2 information, so on and so forth. So we added a self-service layer. And this also had to be authenticated because it's private information that they've got access to, but not necessarily as heavily authenticated as core system users. Then we get to a place where we say, we actually want to include the public, give access to the public. So for example, in the HCM world, we said towards late 90s, early 2000s, okay, we want to actually have people be able to get in and applicants get in and look at available jobs inside of PeopleSoft. Well, how do we do that if they don't have a user ID? Well, we'll create a public portal and give them access to look up the job information. That's not private. We actually want people to see that. So put that on a public portal. But what about when we want to gather their employee, their resume from them and their profile information? We don't want that to be public, but we also don't want to necessarily create a self-service ID for them. We want them to be able to do this really quickly. And so we end up with some interesting places where you're doing storing private data in the public space, but adding a layer of authentication on top of that public layer. And we'll show you how we end up doing that. So some examples here of what happens in each of these layers. I think I hit play there. No, maybe not. So, sorry. So we've got some examples of what happens in each layer. You've got job data that really is part, again, we're using HCM examples, but you can fill in the blanks. You've got data that lives in each of these layers. And in order to involve external participants in PeopleSoft, you really are working with this outside layer. And we're going to add functionality to that outside layer. But I did want to illustrate that it isn't a new crazy thing. That's something that PeopleSoft has been doing. It's a PeopleSoft best practice for many years now. So let's look at a case study of getting a parent's signature on a student form. Okay, so here is a quick demo of how this could look. So we have a student who needs to get their parent's signature. So we say, hey, come in and set up your parent access so they can sign this form. And so we pre-populate. This is a GTE form that's been pre-populated with the student's information, but now we need the student to provide the parent's information. So they provide some parental information, including an email address that we will use to connect with them. And we're going to use a quick, dirty little passphrase. This will be like a poor man's two-factor authentication. We could do a rich man's dual-factor authentication too, but this is just a quick one. We'll just say, using other than email, give your parents that passphrase, your parent that passphrase. So now the student's done. They have kicked off an invitation to the parent that's going to go to the parent's email address. And so now the parent gets an email, and it's not really from John, it's from the PeopleSoft system, saying, oh, your signature is requested. Click here to create your electronic signature and access the student account. This link will expire in 6 hours. Okay, so they click that link, and now here they are on a PeopleSoft page on their phone. And they've heard over text that the passphrase is tiny dancer. So they put that in. And now our goal is to, we're authenticating them, and we're going to give them access to be able to sign a form. So we've validated under that button there. I'm pausing this. It's not really taking that long. But we're validating, yep, this is the person that we wanted to be able to see this particular form. So we can actually route them right into the form that the student created. So the student's information is now read-only. The parent's information is read-write. They can see stuff that the student didn't see, like an opportunity to enter AGI, to decide whether they're actually providing support to the student, and gathering an attestation. And then they can submit this, and it's now been routed on to other people. And you can see also that we actually see that frivolous clock 1. We actually, in this approach, we generated a user ID for the parent, but the parent didn't need to know it. All the parent needed was to click that link and know the passphrase to be able to sign the form. But we actually got a signature based on their user ID. And that user ID can persist for future forms. So we've got the student signature and the parent signature now. So there's an example. And there are a few things that went into being able to do that. First, we needed to have a public portal set up. And if you're interested in knowing how to set up a public portal, we've got a public portal guide that we're happy to share. It's a PowerPoint that walks through all the setup to put a public portal on one of your existing PeopleSoft environments. And then we also used, in order to accomplish this, a GTE forms functionality called a token. So in that token setup, we'll just walk through really quickly what that looks like. So after you install GTE forms into your PeopleSoft environment, you have new setup tables for our product that allow you to create forms like the one we just walked through, and to use extended features like tokens. So tokens allow you to associate a token string with a particular transaction and with data related to that transaction. So in the demo I just showed you, we used two different token types. we had a token first that gave them access to that first provisioning page where they had to enter the passphrase in order to get access to the system. So this token knew where to go to get to that parent access set up. And this token also knew a bunch of related information like who the student was and what form ID we were giving them access to, and the email address and the name of the parent and what the passphrase was. So all that data got automatically associated with this token, but it isn't actually in the token. The token was connected to that email that we sent out, but then when they came back, we checked that token, validated that data, and were able to pre-populate that page with their initial information. Then there's a second token that if they succeed at that page, they get a more permanent token that associates this parent with their student. And in this case, also with the form ID that student gave them access to see. So they can have persistent access to be able to see that form. We could make it so that they have persistent access to see any of the students' forms. And you could also extend that and give them access to additional students as well. So using that token setup, we, let's see, I think we're close to the end of the demo here. Another thing to note is that the tokens know where to navigate to after their process. These are these token types. Okay, so then we end up with the ability to accomplish what we just did. I'm going to go back to my awesome graphics program here. I'm going to stretch out those circles from our previous demo into layers of the application. We've got our core layer, our self-service layer, and our public layer. And then we'll add one in for the parent for their email address up top here. So here's the flow that we just went through, and I'll just describe what's happening. First, we start out in the self-service area. The student has access to start a parent access form. So they go in, they start this form, and it creates this token. Just pretend like that coin is the token that we just generated. That token, using some awesome automation here, there we go. Token gets sent up to the email for the parent. The parent opens the email, clicks that link, and that link is pointing to a public token listener. So this public listener is on a public portal. And again, those public portals are easy to set up. And that it's basically just an iScript that listens for, that's out there looking for a URL to be pointed to it that passes along a token. So that token goes to the public token listener. The listener looks and says, okay, what e-form type, what name, what's all the information that goes along with this, and where am I supposed to be routing to? And it says, well, you're supposed to go to the self-provisioning page. The self-provisioning page is also in the public portal, but you can't get there unless you've got a token, a valid token that hasn't expired that points there. So you've got this expiring invitation that lets you get to the self-provisioning page. And that self-provisioning page is going to check and make sure, again, that I've got a valid token before I even do anything. When you successfully self-provision, then behind the scenes, we are creating a self-service user ID for the parent and a new token. So now all of a sudden the parent has access to the self-service realm because we've authenticated them. And we've created a user ID for them even though they don't know what it is. And they don't need to know what it is because they have the token that pointed them there. and we can engage with them, and we could let them know what the user ID and password is if we want, but we don't have to. We can do all this authentication just with the tokens. So now they're authenticated as a parent, and they're in the self-service layer, so they can see that e-form that the student started, and they can resubmit that form, basically sign it and say, yep, here's my signature approving this form. And then, and it's authenticated by that token, we can then route right back to the core level and say, let's route it to admin staff, and they can look and see that this form got signed by the parent. And we can include that form data in queries, so we can look and see what students have parental access approved, what ones do they still need to be approved. And we've had this process flow then start from self-service, go to an external participant, pull that participant in through a public portal, authenticate them, provision them, and authenticate them in the self-service layer, have them act on a self-service transaction, and then route to core users from there, all while keeping the core data completely secure. Okay, let's see. So just a quick look at how this happened. There are a number of things that we put together in order to build this. We used GTE forms to build the form itself. Framework means it's part of GTE forms. We used some internal tech, a little bolt-on called our demo thread tool, and then we did some development for the parent access solution itself. And it is a fairly robust solution. You'll see, and you can get access to this deck and this video, look through how this was done, and where we added everything. You can see the code that we used to store the information in our token class, and watch how we pushed this through to what code we used on that provisioning page in order to authenticate them and generate their second token, and follow through how that flowed really from beginning to end. All the code that we used to sign the data and to generate the token from the form. It's again a fairly robust solution, but reuses a lot of technology that comes with GTE forms, or that you have access to as a GTE form subscriber. Okay, so that is just one example of some of the things that you can do with a token. And let's see, am I out of time? I think I can, if you need to leave, feel free. Let's see, do we end it at right now?
I think it was now.
Okay.
But yeah, feel free if there are things you can finish, Paul. And
okay.
Again, yeah, folks need to leave. That's understandable.
Feel free to throw in questions at this point. There are a number of things. Again, you can throw questions in the chat while I just hit a couple slides here at the end. But using tokens, you can do cool things like what we just saw. You can use them to provide row and transaction level security to data. You can use them. We use them for email-based approvals. So in GTE forms now, you can just put an approval link in an email and let them approve without even going into the system. You can let some things happen outside of firewalls or two-factor authentication restrictions. So if you've got transactions that really don't need two-factor, you can use a token to basically gather that information through a public portal and still have security and restrictions based on that. So lots of things you can do with those tokens. Here are some examples. I'll just leave this up so you can look at it while we talk. Some examples of external participant solutions. If there's anything we've learned as we've been doing these over the past year, they're always different. Every solution is different. Sometimes we're creating auto-generating user IDs like we did here at UC Berkeley, just like this demo. In this case, we auto-generated IDs for external graduate committee members, even though they never had to know what they were. But that automatically happened when things were routed to them for approvals. And there are other places where they never do, like here at Princeton, we're letting faculty onboarders, people who are coming on, candidates who are coming on to be faculty members at Princeton, they get a link and an invitation to securely enter their personal information, and they don't have to ever give that over the phone or over email. It goes right in an encrypted page, but they never have to have a user ID. They just get an invitation that's token authenticated to an invitation to provide that information. So lots of approaches, and our tools have been really helpful to be able to create custom solutions to extend PeopleSoft functionality to external participants. Okay, I'll leave this up for a minute. Any other questions? Thank you for the comment, Seema. It's pretty useful. It was both pretty and useful. Could have been prettier, but it was just a demo. Anything else? If you're not familiar with GTE forms, you can, there's a little description here, but you can learn more about it either at our YouTube channel or our website, or as we're still here for RECONNECT, stop by our booth. We have someone there ready for a live chat anytime during the conference.